If you would have read this inscription as increases your skill damage dealt by 10%, I would have agreed with you until about 1 week ago, when I realized what the differences between boosts to skill damage and increases to skill damage actually were in Rise of Kingdoms. And if somebody who plays the game as much as I do still didn't know that kind of information, I wanted to bring that more into light if you haven't seen other content creators who have already covered this topic before, those of which will be down in the description below. Some of them, namely Bus Driver and namely Cwill. That being said, we're going to go over the differences between boosts to skill damage and increases to skill damage, and how the special inscription meta might actually change the best 5 to 6 to 7 marshes you can bring to the field based on how many special inscriptions you have. They're so strong that they could literally change what is best for your open field lineup. Anyway, let's hop into it. Before we get started, I just want to again shout out Cwill, who I believe was the original content creator who brought this topic and this information to light. I have his video detailed up on screen, but again, his information will be linked in the description below. That being said, while I'm not going to go in depth as he did in his video, I am going to explain really quick his findings in the video. So he broke down the difference between boosts and additions. So it sounds easy when you say it out loud like that. However, when you're reading it, I often read this as a 10% increase to skill damage done. That is not what this is doing. To give an example, every single commander starts at 100% of your baseline skill damage done. In that case, Intrepid would increase that 100% by 10%. Do you get where I'm going here? It's a multiplicative increase, not an additive increase. And if we go to a commander, let's give a popular one, right? Like YSG, for example. This Destiny skill, the 4 skill in YSG, gives a 50% more skill damage buff. This is an additive increase, essentially making whenever you use YSG in your pairing, you're adding 50% to your baseline skill damage done. So that would then become 150%. Well, if we go into armaments again, well, what actually happens with Intrepid? In that case, you are actually getting a 15% bonus to skill damage when you are using Intrepid. This makes it so that these special inscriptions are insanely strong, and even stronger when you have multiple of them. For example, Hunter stacks with Intrepid, you could get something like an average of 20% bonus skill damage boost to your march if you just have 2 of these. Now, I won't get too far ahead of myself as far as spoilers into where I think the meta could be shifting, but all I know is that this is insanely powerful. For example, the Arch formation has been very popular recently for the Gorgo and Attila combination. Well, if you try and just understand why for a moment, I did just come out with a inscription guide for Battle Ready, and while it was not completely accurate, Destructive really does outshine it in a lot of ways, and especially once you have more additions to your normal damage done. This is why things like Gorgo and Attila are so powerful, because Attila gives a boatload of normal damage increase, making all of these special inscriptions even stronger, right? So when you are looking at something like Fearless and you have Gorgo popping off with a ton of normal damage increase, and then additionally, right, so this is 30% more normal damage. Well, if you have Fearless, this is actually boosted by another 8% on top of your 100%, right? Like, you can see how all this stuff with the multiplicative increases become really insane. Also, you take a look at Attila, right? One of the oldies but a favorite, and this is why smite damage kind of breaks the game, is that this guy is doing 30% here and then 20% here, so 50% more normal damage on his active skill. It basically just becomes really insane, and the multiplicative increases go absolutely nuts for Gorgo and Attila, which is also why the garrison works in these Warriors and Bound KVKs, where you're able to swap troop types. It's really kind of damning for the future of the game in a sense, because I don't know how Attila will ever not be good with this amount of bonus damage increase unless they power creep the game like crazy. That being said, it also makes it so that commanders such as Nevsky, such as Belisarius, right? The new Belisarius Prime, such as Huo, are really hard to replace in your murder ball just because of the amount of bonuses to skill damage that they do. If you, for example, are taking the combination of Nevsky with Huo, or I guess Huo primary in this case, you can actually get up to a baseline of 200% or 210% increase to your skill damage dealt. This is not including procs, this is not including anything, just from your skills on the commanders. Now, if you have something like a Hunter on here, you have something like an Intrepid on here, that 210% becomes like 40%. That is now like a YSG fourth skill. It becomes even more disgusting in KVK, such as things like Siege of Orleans, such as Heroic Anthem, such as Alliance Invictus, where you can add YSG's skill on here or any other skill damage modifiers just to basically pump up as much skill damage as possible onto one commander so that these insane armament inscriptions can do even more work. So basically, it's Lilith's way of balancing out the diminishing returns of skill damage increases with just flat out boost to skill damage. So after knowing this information, where does this kind of leave my head? Where do I think the game is going in the future? Well, honestly, skill damage stacking on top of skill damage seems like it's going to be very, very strong. It used to not be as strong without the use of special inscriptions or without the commonality of special inscriptions because things like diminishing returns did exist, right? So if you pair something like Nevsky with something like YSG, well, the YSG wouldn't actually be giving you a flat 50% more skill damage bonus because the Nevsky was already giving you so much skill damage, right? That you would actually be getting, and I don't have the exact math on this, but more like a 30% maybe bonus to your active skill instead of 50 from YSG. Now, that being said, now, with all of the benefits to the boost of skill damage, like Intrepid, like Hunter, it actually makes sense why combinations like Huo and YSG are so good in Warrior Bound KVKs, because all these whales have 2 to 3 special inscriptions on their main cap march, and they're running around dealing absolutely boatloads of skill damage. Additionally, I think that it's hard now to leave the archetype of skill damage for commanders like Cavalry. I've looked through this a lot, and I had a really super hot take, and this is just something that I'm not saying is going to be correct, but it does make me worry a little bit about commanders such as Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc is one of the best cav commanders in the game. Up until about a week ago, I would have said that she is the best cav commander in the game, but after knowing how special inscriptions work, her value unironically goes down as you get more special inscriptions, and the reason for this is that she actually does not give you any bonuses to skill damage, right? And we've looked through her kit pretty substantially here. Nevsky, however, gives a boatload of bonuses to skill damage. Huo gives boatloads of bonuses to skill damage, and even the new commander, Belisarius Prime, does give a 30% boost to skill damage for targets who are below 80%. Now, for your average player, all this information that I'm telling you is not going to change your open field lineup that much. You're still going to run something like Nevsky Joan and Huo with William. But if you are a Mega Kraken, you can actually start to consider something crazy like benching your Joan. And why do I say this? Well, because if you end up stacking up all these special inscriptions on one march, you could end up running something like Nevsky with William. And by the way, William is fantastic in this meta now, even more fantastic than I already thought, but you're going to run something like Nevsky with William and Huo with Belisarius. Something like that with all of that skill damage increase, and in William's case, skill damage nullifier. You essentially need those 4 commanders for as much utility and as much damage output as possible. It's kind of absurd, but you could think about benching Joan if you do have that many special inscriptions. I'd say if your march, like if you're comparing the one best cap march in the game, right now I would tell you that it's Nevsky with Joan of Arc. However, if you all of a sudden had a cap set with 3 special inscriptions on it, well, I would then argue that if you're bringing one march to a murder ball, maybe it's Nevsky with Huo, or Huo of Nevsky, just because of how the multiplicative increases work with your special inscriptions. I know it's a hot take. I have no numbers to back this up. I haven't done the testing. I mean, I barely spent on armaments. I mean, I say that as I just dropped $385 on it. But that being said, not that many people have these special inscriptions. I'm just telling you where the game could go in the future. And that's kind of what I'm worried about, right? Like, it makes it very obvious as to what the future commander design of Rise of Kingdoms cavalry commanders have to be, right? Like, it either needs to be a high skill damage amplifier, or it has to be a skill damage double proc, something like Joan of Arc, just because if it doesn't, then there's no chance that it'll ever keep up with the skill damage amplifications of the boosts in armaments. That being said, if they release anything other than those two archetypes, well, then it has to be something that's as game-breaking as Liu Che and Gorgo paired with Attila. And this is something that is going to be such a high power spike that I don't actually know if it's healthy for the game. But that being said, we'll see where they go with it. I know that this is kind of a interesting and maybe a little confusing topic just because not many of us have all these special inscriptions. I mean, hell, I spend a ton on this game and I don't have that many special inscriptions. But as the game develops, right, and the longer the special inscriptions are in the game, you can see that eventually this might become a problem and really kind of constrain Lilith in their commander design going forward. Well, so what do you think about it? Did you even know that boost to skill damage worked how they did? Because I sure didn't. So if you didn't know that, then hit the like button, subscribe, because I'm sure that I'll bring you some more information that I should have known about a month or two ago when all this information became public. But that being said, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys again in the next one. Peace.